All right, what's up, guys? Hope you can hear me. So we're going to I'm going to try to keep this short. I'm trying a new method, which is with obviously PowerPoint, to make sure that I go over everything that I need to, and also that I keep it down and just calculative, more or less, discussion. So I'm talking about the recent transit with Jupiter going into Sagittarius. I understand that Jupiter isn't actually having direct aspects with Saturn right now, but when referencing the symbolism in ancient medieval astrology with Jupiter to Saturn, it's important to understand the Kronos versus Zeus mythology and how that plays out with man and with sociological trends. So let's go ahead and get into this. So introduction, I'm a psychic astrologist, Ray Reinhardt. So this is my latest transit talk presentation. I'm supposed to do it on the 18th, so I'm 2 days late. Fashionably late Libra as always. This lecture will highlight ongoing transits primarily with Jupiter entering in Sagittarius and Saturn in Capricorn. I didn't go into Saturn and Capricorn as much because I actually started to kind of snowball into things that'll get me in trouble or have gotten me in trouble in the past, which you'll hear about. So I didn't elaborate as much on that as I probably wanted to, but that's okay, because this is mainly about Jupiter being in Sagittarius, so that's why. So I'm doing this, attempt to make a new format. I kind of already said that. So if you're new to my videos, check out rayreinhardt.blog. That's my alternative site that I pay for because I've been blacklisted by Google and banned from Facebook before for saying some of the things that I know. So that's my alternative if my account gets zucked, or if my YouTube continues to get counts against the account. So that's where all my previous transit discussions are. And if you want to go check out my Saturn and Capricorn video, that one is on rayreinhardt.blog as well. So my older 101 astrology videos, if you're interested in some of my tutorial things. Do you need me to let you in? Okay. If you're interested in some of my older tutorial videos and stuff, go check out Ray Reinhardt's Chaos Astrologer on YouTube. So Jupiter 101, it's important to understand the mythology. So mythology is deeply tied to astrological symbolism and translations of the planet Jupiter. So it's important to understand Jupiter's symbolism while utilizing it in charts. Jupiter is represented by Zeus, the god of gods, son of Kronos. In other symbolic representations, Jupiter shares rulership with Pisces in ancient astrology, as well as Sagittarius. Both signs are intangible, expansive, which lacks self-control and conservatism. It's important to keep these characteristics in mind when applying the meaning to transit aspects in astrology, whether it be natal or prediction astrology. I always say that wrong. I always say Hori or whatever. Whatever. Anyway, Jupiter and Sagittarius in astrology. In modern rulership, Jupiter is ruled by the sign of Sagittarius. Modern meaning the current representation of Jupiter. That's when obviously there were more planets discovered. In ancient or medieval astrology, which is the basis for medical astrology as well as was dualistic, just as an example with the planet Venus, still to this day with modern astrology, is represented by Libra as well as Taurus. The same kind of duality applied to all other planets as well and signs. That's referenced also in the Greek mythology too. So I personally use correlations of Pisces as well as Sagittarius when deciphering transits with Jupiter. That being said, Jupiter is the masculine depiction of Neptune. It's a fiery Neptune. Jupiter and Sagittarius archetype. Jupiter, often characterized as the symbolism for modern society, the ideas of knowledge of man, religion, not spirituality, but dogma. So, people who are Catholics or, are really obsessed with biblical narratives or religious texts, those sorts of things differ from general spirituality. It also represents beliefs, higher education, travel, foreign things, everything that is hopeful, expansive, optimistic. That's a typical Sagittarius trait. They're boastful, they're outgoing, they're optimistic, they're over the top, which again is correlating with it being the masculine facet of Neptune and Pisces. So we need to take, when taking those extroverted concepts into account, it's easy to see the duality of Pisces being incorporated. Idealistic, fanatical, dreamy, intangible, those kind of things can be applied to Sagittarius as well as Pisces, so you understand the duality that I'm talking about. I find it crucial to discuss the associations with Neptune's ruler, Pisces, and Sagittarius during this transit talk because we are currently enduring a Jupiter square Neptune transit for the remainder of 2018, and it will be going into late January into early February when it will be exact aspects. So why is Saturn important now, since this is all about Jupiter and Sagittarius? Well, Saturn's the timekeeper. Therefore, it's always important to keep Saturn in the loop, more or less, when deciphering transits, especially mundane astrology or sociological events. So there's obviously natal astrology, which is, and Placidius kind of charts are more keen for individual interpretations when looking at an individual's chart and like the synchronistic patterns and life cycles of them. But when you're looking at sociological trends or mundane general trends, it's important to include all of the outer planets primarily. So Saturn determines the modality. It's a subperiod every 3 years. Saturn is Kronos, lord of the heavens and time. It is also represented as the dark duality of Jupiter or the sun, depending on the mythology that you reference. Also, because Saturn is in its modern rulership of Capricorn, the classic Greek mythology of Kronos and Zeus battling will continue to play out in current events globally. This will be a universal issue, a feud between traditional standards and authorities and younger generations acting out as the rebels of the Pluto and Capricorn transit. The rebels are not actually the people who were born within the Pluto and Capricorn transit. That's Pluto and Scorpio that are actually that. So people my age, anybody born between 1984 to 1995, are going to be the key role players that are like Antifa or the Yellow Vests and all this kind of revolt against the establishment, regardless of political spectrums which you lie. So Saturn versus Jupiter is continuing. So for some brief symbolic representations of Saturn, this is where I'm going to kind of go into Saturn a little bit. In mundane astrology, it would be government, monarchs, political leaders, any kind of sociological institutions. Although many of those facets are ascribed to Aquarius in the 11th house, remember the duality of all the planets. In ancient astrology, Saturn is also dualistic and ruled by Aquarius as well as Saturn. Or, I meant to say Capricorn, sorry. Aquarius and Capricorn are both ruled by Saturn in ancient astrology. AKA when the Bible says after Jesus is crucified, you go into you follow the man bearing the pitcher of water and go to the house that he entereth in. The representation of this trend of transitioning through the progression to the age of Aquarius, we're on the verge of that, is depicted by Satan, or aka Saturn, ruling the world for 2,000 years. That's in Revelations, which is the ETA of an age. An age is actually 2,160 years, I believe. That's if you calculate it from like the Vapor Yuga and some of the Vedic associations. And the man bearing the pitcher of water entering the house, that's biblical symbolism directly associated with the progression into the Aquarius age. Very symbolic, very easy to understand. In fact, the Bible is actually a depiction of astrological events if you get past all of the dogmatic stuff. FYI. Saturn versus Jupiter, continuing references back to Greek mythology. Uranus, which is Uranus, Kronos are symbolized by Uranus and Saturn, which both have commonality, but are also two separate entities. Both Uranus and Saturn will be having aspects with Jupiter and each other throughout this Jupiter year. I see Jupiter year because it takes one whole year, quote unquote. It doesn't start at the beginning of the year to the end. It has its own cycle. It takes one whole Earth year for Jupiter to go through a sign. So it takes 12 years for it to go through an entire cycle of all the zodiac signs. So when you reference the battle of the Titans and the storyline with Greek gods, you will see a mirror sociologically as the citizens versus world leaders, nationalists versus globalists, and one versus many. It's important to note that since Pluto went into Capricorn, which is Saturn's ruler, Capricorn, the ball has already been rolling with these trends, and all this transit will do is amplify the ongoing tensions. Now with Uranus and Taurus, which is synchronistic for world wars, global and major battles, this will be a precursor for the next major world conflict. It is yet to be seen what that will be. Obviously, the refugee thing is a huge deal. There's obviously some fights with the UN and everything, but they don't really have that much of a military backing, thanks to what Trump did with our military. So let's go ahead and look at the actual chart, and let's break this down. This is for November 11th, 2018. This is the day that Jupiter went into Sagittarius, as you can see right here in the second house. So depicting at the current time, which will be unfolding as of now, we look at the now houses. The first house, the fourth house, the seventh, and the 10th. We have Ceres on the ascendant, and it's actually conjunct with Venus, although Venus is in the 12th house. This means that we're coming to a realization on how to balance ourselves or take care of ourselves and to not bleed out any of our own personal resources for the sake of globalism. That's reemphasized by the stellium going on with Neptune and Hygeia, as well as Chiron in the 5th house of self. That is a future house, but it does have aspects, as you can tell. The sun being there as well with Vulcan means that there's some sort of, and being in Scorpio means there's some sort of animosity building beneath the community at large about the injustices that have been going on. And that's emphasized as well with there being aspects to Pallas in the 12th house there. Pallas also being in the sign of Venus. Pallas is actually ruled by Venus, and that's Jupiter's daughter. So there's a lot of, when Pallas is badly aspected, which it definitely has some squares in there, as you can see, Pallas lashes out. Let me think of the best way to describe this as like a social justice warrior going completely psychotic. I'm not talking about the psychotic spectrum of that, but with them lashing out really, really outlandishly and dramatically, histrionically, more or less. That would be how that's expressed here in this moment with this aspect. So it doesn't say that being actually a past house for the 12th house means that that's what's been going on. All the buildup beneath, in festering inside of people has been making people lash out, hence the yellow vest protests going on in France. Then we look to the 4th house. We have Black Moon Lilith, Mars, and the South Node. So there's a lot of places locally or like in the community, especially older generations, that are starting to feel some sort of deja vu or traumatizing kind of things with some precursors that happened before, either because there's going to be a recession coming on, or specifically that there's this huge rise in socialism or globalism, which is Neptune and Pisces' fault, by the way. So there's a lot of people reminiscing about, oh my gosh, we're heading down, into this downward spiral of going to a socialist state, or everything's, falling apart and that sort of thing, which will make people act out really traumatically and be traumatizing, more or less, either to their community or to themselves. We have Uranus in the 7th house, which kind of just reinforces what I was talking about, the hostility and everything building up with the Sun and Vulcan and Scorpio in the 1st house, and people feeling this urgency with the Aquarius Mars to act out in their local areas or their communities, either regardless if they're fighting for their country, or they're just, kind of psychotic, which a lot of people are, and lashing out in general. Uranus being in the 7th house means that there's a repercussion of trauma being inflicted upon the entire collective, peoples and everything in general. Then we have the North Node in the 10th house on the midheaven, which means that with the North Node there, that means that we're heading in the intended direction that we need to for this events ongoing. This is definitely the precursor to a revolution, and that will be happening again globally. So in the future houses, that's the 2nd, 5th, 8th, and 11th. We have obviously Jupiter, which is our main contender here we're talking about, in that house. So Jupiter conjunct with Mercury is going to go into a lot of the ideations that I'll get into on my next slide. Then we have the 5th house, which Chiron, Hygeia, and Neptune all being conjunct there means that there's a emphasis of the self trying to take care of its own weaknesses, trying to nip in the bud its own shortcomings. And this also is a great aspect to highlight the synchronistic 100th year anniversary for the worst influenza pandemic that there was back in 1918. Then we go into the 8th house. There's the polar ascendant there in Gemini. That more or less Gemini just ruling over the 8th house means there's going to be a split in secular, monetary possessions in general. People are going to be split down the middle, and it's the versus sort of thing, which is something I've already emphasized on, and is more of an emphasis with Saturn versus Jupiter, as I said initially. Trans-Pluto being in the 11th house is the good thing in this here, because Trans-Pluto is actually the transformation before Pluto's actual regeneration happens. So this is like the pre-test for the test sort of thing with Trans-Pluto. It being in Virgo means that the people collectively are being very selective, critical, and picky about some of the organizations, institutions, and seeing if they're actually serving the public or serving themselves. You see that there's a grand trine with Trans-Pluto to Saturn to Uranus, demonstrating that people are becoming aware that the authorities, political leaders, et cetera, have been thoroughly abusing them, abusing their power, and don't have any interest in mind for the people, and don't actually care about the people. That's not their priority. That's becoming evident. Let's go ahead and move on to my next slide. Jupiter aspects to highlight. So there's a T-square with trans-Pluto, Mars, and Jupiter occupying the 2nd, 4th, and 11th house, translating to actions taken by local community. I kind of re-emphasize on that. Homeland, because of what they believe is best for themselves, Jupiter 2nd house, will transform the political or sociological structure in the ongoing conflict with institutions, mainly organizations like, for example, the EU, the UN, and global treaties, etc. Jupiter versus Saturn. So this is also the same chart. I just kind of took out some of the extra aspects or the extra fictitious points, so you can kind of see more of Jupiter's direct aspects going on. So we see some aspects to Uranus here, which the aspect to Uranus with Jupiter as well as Pallas just kind of re-emphasizes what I was talking about, that there's going to be innocent people more or less acting out and trying to defend themselves because of their own ideology and wanting to better themselves, their resources, their community. And then we also have a square with Mars, which means people's ideologies and beliefs are going to cause conflict. That's typical. Then we also have Jupiter trying to cure on people being aware of their weaknesses and things that they need to work on strength-wise. And then obviously we have Jupiter squaring trans-Pluto, which means that despite the best intentions, there's going to be definitely a very intense fight going on with this this aspect thing going on. So we are in the cardinal years. Everybody's going to be really proactive. It's going to definitely be violent. Like, there's no way to say that this will be resolved in a nice manner at all. That goes on to, again, the big trine that you see with Uranus and Saturn, the Moon, and Pluto, and the trans-Pluto aspect. The T-square between, which is what I was emphasizing on, between Jupiter here to trans-Pluto to Mars, means that there's absolutely going to be violence and everything like that, hostility involved. There's every single word you can think of that would be anything but harmonious and cooperative is going to transpire. So you have to keep in mind that this is going to be happening while Jupiter is in Sagittarius. It will continue on after Jupiter goes into Capricorn, which, as a matter of fact, that'll make Saturn, Pluto, and Jupiter all conjunct. So this huge conflict will still continue on. Primarily the synchronistic associations with that is Uranus and Taurus, even though Uranus went retrograde and it's in Aries right now. Uranus and Taurus is notorious for war. So this will likely be a long ongoing thing. So I already talked about this, but I guess I'll just read it for the heck of reading it because I worked on these. Sorry. Jupiter aspect highlights. Jupiter aspecting Pallas, which is Zeus's daughter in Greek mythology, is concerned the public should be aware of. Is a concern. Here we go. Is a concern the public should be aware of. Sorry. I'm not treading. I know I'm treading on thin ice about this. This is where I thought I was going to get in trouble. So Pallas represents justice, legal battles, conflicts, defense, disputes. The favorable aspect to Jupiter insinuates that knowledge of those conspiring with authority will be leaked, i.e., likely through the internet, social media, which is why there's been extensive efforts for censoring and regulating the internet, social media, why Facebook is in cahoots with that, Twitter, etc., etc. The traditional methods to keep the masses calm and stupid is no longer working, which is also why Pallas is square to Saturn. Jupiter in the chart is at 11 degrees away from Mercury, and although that is more than 10 degrees, in medieval astrology, aspects were defined on loose terms, specifically strong aspects. That would be the major aspects that you see: conjunctions, squares, oppositions, sextiles, trines, etc. So I do include that this is a conjunction with Jupiter. Jupiter and Mercury conjunction unites analytical thoughts and common sense, calculations, etc. to the mind. So the communities, despite their differences, will likely begin to unite and work together in against the totalitarian state, which is typical synchronistic-wise for Pluto and Capricorn transit. Again, when the United States was founded, the American Revolutionary War, that's when Pluto was in Capricorn as well, fighting against the British. You can also see this happening in France. France is more becoming like a unified against the state, first and foremost, over most other countries, at least that I'm aware of. Chiron trine to Jupiter in opposition Pallas in the 5th house represents a joint effort while still struggling against the conspiring authorities that intend to weaken the masses, with Chiron in Pisces still. That would represent poisoning or somehow sabotaging the entire world's resources. Could translate to a market crash, which the Federal Reserve raising the interest rates while Trump has actually been improving the United States economy, and there being a continuation to bleed out the the actual monetary sources by bringing in refugees, this invasion thing that's orchestrated. Palace in the 12th house is a great example of that. I mean, this has been an ongoing thing, but yes, it's been orchestrated. It is to cause a global crash, to make people dependent on the state, to then force everybody to be more of a socialist state. You have to depend on the government, because back when we had the first stock market crash, this is where I'm going to get in trouble. When we had the first stock market crash in the United States, I've already proven with the charts that it was actually orchestrated primarily to take over like General Electric and major corporations and that, so the little man couldn't necessarily get a big piece of that pie and become profitable, therefore becoming dependent on the government. Same kind of shit's going on now, and that's also what I got banned for on Facebook last time. So that's actually kind of where I wanted to end that, because I was going to see how much I should push my luck. And here we can't see the chart. Sorry. Yeah, and I couldn't. I'm gonna end this now, but I had to actually keep my slideshow open. I didn't even see any of your commentary. So let's go ahead and look at commentary going on here. 1984, 1905 sounds accurate. Yeah. Here, but can't see the charts. Let's see. Can I? I'll share the charts actually on my Facebook, Keith, and see them. I guess, is there any questions before I get off of this? I don't know if you guys are even still here. I can't tell what's going on here. But anyway, I guess I'm just going to end this and, yeah, see how this went. If you have any further questions or you want me to talk about something else, or if anybody wants to jump in and, like, do a split screen sometime and talk about this, hit me up.